Vice presidential contender J.D. Vance made a comment about presidential candidate Kamala Harris being a, quote, childless cat lady all those years ago. It was recently revisited and has sent culture shock waves throughout the U.S. Wasn't the only thing Vance has said about childless women and couples. Let's take another look at statements he made in 2019.
I've seen people who become more attached to their communities, to their families, to their country because they have children. So I would say that we should care about declining fertility, not just because it's bad for our economy, but because we think babies are good. And we think babies are good because we're not sociopaths.
Those are supposedly controversial remarks. I don't think they're that controversial, but let's fast forward to 2024. The American family becoming hyper-politicized on both sides. The U.S. fertility rate steadily falling, mirroring trends in other countries. It hits a record low of 1.62 births per woman in 2023, and a recent Pew study showing 47% of adults under the age of 50 who don't have kids are unlikely to have them, up 10 points from 2018.
A growing chorus of conservative pundits have latched on to a traditional image of family life, man, woman, and children. They've been increasingly vocal about criticizing people who don't live that way. Values aside, this trend has real implications for America's future and economic growth, especially if immigration is reined in. It is also worth noting that policy issues have an impact. Childcare, or lack of it, has real economic impacts on the majority of parents. Democrats have fought against GOP messaging that it is the party of pro-family, pointing to Senate Republicans' rejection of a bipartisan bill last week that would have expanded the child tax credit. So what do you think, Robby? Is this a fair criticism from Republicans to point to policies like the child tax credit, which Republicans have used as an example, J.D. Vance himself, of them being pro-family?
Well, I mean, like I said, first of all, I don't know, he's being slammed, the weird J.D. Vance, weird. I get that it was mean to call Kamala a childless cat lady, which, he now says was a joke. And it's fine, obviously, for people to be childless, whether men, women, young or old. I am myself childless. It's fine. I don't care. Other people's business is no one else's. The point that J.D. Vance is making is that we should make it easier for people to have families, to have large families if they want to have them, because having kids is good if that's the choice you want to make. And if there's pressure not to do that because of the new economic or socioeconomic reality, then that's bad, and that's something Republicans ought to fix. Now, I don't know that the child tax credit is necessarily the right way to go about it. I would like to see everybody, childless or not, pay less in taxes at every level, and to improve the economic situation more generally, and to make it get rid of regulations and other things that are making childcare and healthcare more expensive, schooling more expensive, and that would be the best thing I think we could do for working people, for working families. But it's not weird to point out the fact that having kids can make you more invested in your community and your country, and that it's generally a good thing. I don't know if our Democrats or media commentators, I guess, trying to suggest the opposite. That I don't even know. I don't know what to make of. What is the criticism?
Yeah, for me, the weird part comes from this antisocial, honestly, perspective. That's how I view it, as antisocial, to think that everyone you meet should be like you, should have the same values as you, and want the same things in life as you. The way they talk about women who don't have children, childless cat ladies, I think that is weird to talk about other people like that just because they make different decisions in their own life than you've made. I think the right approach to this, especially if you're a politician running for national office like J.D. Vance is to actually take a good hard look at the economy and ask the question, why are people having less kids now? When you look at what profit margins are today in 2024, we're seeing last year's totals at $3.4 trillion for corporate profits. Trump permanently cut taxes for corporate profits while only temporarily cutting them, and by a lower margin, for working class and middle class families. We've also seen that the profits went up tremendously as a result of this policy, because while they're at 3.4 trillion today, they were at about 2.4 trillion in 2020. So as a result of this policy, corporations are raking it in while working people are more productive than ever before and are struggling. And by the way, a lot of people look at those profits and they say, well, this is because of inflation, because dollars aren't worth as much. That's not what's explained by it, because from the previous 20 years of data, profit margins were 11.4%. Those margins are what's higher. Corporate profits are averaging around 40%. That happened during the pandemic, and they're staying that high. And at minimum wage today, a worker's pay is worth 27% less than in 2009 and 40% less than what it was worth in 1968 when you look at the purchasing power of those dollars. So workers are more productive than ever before. The owners of the companies are making all of the money and not paying working people. If you want people to have families, they need to be able to earn that income. It can't just come through cuts to taxes. They need to be earning it every day when they're working 40 plus hours a week. And so JD Vance and the Republicans not focusing on that in the way that Democrats are, I think is what makes their commentary weird, because you're making it a shaming social decision when it's really an economic one.
I mean, I would say the Democrats are focused everywhere on making things more expensive for those very working families. I brought up this example on Rising before because it's such a clear example. In Washington, D.C., Democrats, regulators, have been trying to require child care professionals, daycare workers, to have college degrees by law. They're not required to have college degrees. People are paying they're paying a lot of money right now for daycare, for childcare in D.C. It would cost exorbitantly more if the daycare workers had to have if they had to go back to college, get a degree. You don't need a degree. This is the kind of what I would call anti-family policy making from progressives, from Democrats. You don't need a college degree to take care of a child. You don't need a credential. You don't need expertise. It's something our parents, grandparents, people can do. You can do that job part-time. My mother was a nursery school teacher for 30 years. She has a college degree. She didn't have the latest, fanciest, best educated, greatest expertise in it. She was just worked with babies and toddlers for a lot of time and a lot of experience doing it and was damn good at it. You don't need some specialty education to do it. And that's the progressive plan, and it's making everything more expensive. They want to make this very important, especially for working people in cities, working people who don't have family members or grandparents who can help take care of the kids, that would make it more expensive. So I look at things like that. Again, schooling, healthcare. What are the sectors where even if you're making more money, you say, what the wages haven't risen and, what you can buy with that wage has gone down. It's because of these very labor-intensive services that are just aggressively regulated and credentialed and are ruining the whole system and are making it so much harder for families, such that you wouldn't want to have more kids. You want to have more kids, but you can't support them because you can't pay for these overly credentialed services.
Well, we've seen the deregulation of industries actually result in the opposite. We've seen the lack of protections of organized labor result in a decline in union membership over the last 50 or so years in the United States. And we've seen workers' wages hurt wherever their industry is not widely unionized. We've also seen, when we look at corporate profits and how high they are, that prior to the pandemic, price increases, always the majority of them, went to workers' wages. Workers saw a share of that money. But during the pandemic, the majority of price increases went directly to corporate profits. So having a Federal Reserve that is intentionally raising interest rates so that there are less jobs for workers and more competition so wages stay low, at a time during the pandemic when workers were told, you're essential, the economy would collapse without you. And they started organizing and saying, well, then pay us what we're worth. And the result of that was a collective effort from the elites in the country to quash any organized labor and to say the economy is too hot and to call it inflationary, when really what their goal is to stop workers clawing back their earned share of the economy. Workers should be able to work a full-time job and put themselves through school. They should be able to afford childcare if they want to work while their child's young enough that they need supervision throughout the day and they're not in school. And those daycare workers should be well trained and understand the psychology of children so that they can give them good and adequate care and raise good future citizens of our country and eventually good workers in our economy. That's something that's good for the economy when workers can afford all of these things. It strengthens our society. And so the wealth transfer we've seen to America's biggest corporations and the elites is the chief reason why most people are populists. They don't want to see this wealth division in a country where supposedly we're all equal and we live in a democracy. It's complete lopsided power. And so, unless you're talking about workers making a decent living, a lot of these policy proposals address symptoms of the problem of living in an economy where the elites are incredibly greedy and enriching themselves off of the backs of working people.
All right. More Rising right after this.